Hey, what's up everybody? It's Kevin with Mix Coach. We're in the middle of a series called Mixing Basics. We talked about filters and how they're kind of underused. We talked about EQ, how to find the pain, reduce the gain. Now we're going to be talking about compressors. Compressors are probably one of the most misunderstood plugins that there is. And today we're going to clear that up. So let's get going. Okay, let's talk about compressors. Let's imagine that you've got a singer who sings really, really soft, and then they sing really, really loud, and you've got to decide, do I want to set the level for the highest part and leave the lowest parts where it's all noisy and you hear air conditioner noises and fan and trucks driving by and things like that? Or do we want to turn it up to where it's nice, healthy level, and then just pray that they don't sing loud again, because they always do, and then let the signal distort? What do you do? What do you do? Here's what you do. You use a compressor. Compressors are really cool in the way that what they're designed to do is to decrease dynamic range. Now, what is dynamic range? Dynamic range is the highest, loudest signal you've got and the lowest signal you've got, and then it's the difference between the two. So if you've got somebody singing at minus 20 dB and then all of a sudden they go up to 0, you've got a 20 dB dynamic range, because the range of the dynamics is 20 dB, okay? So what a compressor does is it takes those dynamics and it squeezes them down until they're not as problematic as they used to be. And then what people decided was that, hey, this compressor has a lot of character. I know it does. Okay, so, and then people started using it to add character to a sound, but its original purpose was to decrease dynamic range, okay? So let's talk about the knobs of a compressor. Let's talk about the knobs that every compressor has. The ones that are hidden and that are kind of like set it and they're done. You can't change it. And don't try. And just pick another compressor if you don't like it, okay? So we're going to talk about really, really simple compressors first. First, let's talk about one of the simplest compressors there is. Now, don't discount this compressor because it doesn't have a lot of knobs and a lot of meters and all that kind of stuff on it, because it's a great compressor, okay? It's it's not a CLA. He's going to rebrand it to be a CLA. It's an LA2A. LA stands for limiting amplifier, okay? It's an LA2A, okay? And it's very simple. Let's talk about the peak reduction. Okay, so the peak reduction knob, if you turned it all the way to the left, that would mean the threshold is very, very high and nothing's going to cross the threshold. We'll get to that in just a second, okay? So peak reduction and threshold on an LA2A are basically one and the same, okay? When you turn up the peak reduction, you're adding more peak reduction. So you're adding the peak is what it's talking about, the really loud parts. So you set it so that you go to the very loud part of the song and you are reducing those peaks, okay? And then on the left, the gain is what we call a makeup gain. And that is, if you have decreased the signal now by, let's just say 5 dB, then you want to make up that 5 dB so that it's louder, because that's kind of the point, right? Is to make it louder. So what we do on the LA2A is basically just make sure that the gain is right around 32, or right around the 30, between 30 and 35, right here. And even the vintage ones they have these numbers on it. So put it about right there, and then you just turn the peak reduction up until you get the right amount of peak reduction, okay? All right, so that's how you set this. Now, there's two modes of compression on the LA2. Now, if you notice that we turned the threshold up, but you can't adjust the ratio, which is what we'll cover next. It's built in, and it's at a set ratio, and except for these knobs right here. The compress, when you hit compress, you're getting 3 to 1 or 4 to 1. And again, I'll cover this in just a second. When you hit limit, it goes higher. You get about 10 to 1, okay? So let's go back to compress mode. Now, what is a ratio? A ratio is, let's just say that you set the threshold to where, and the signal going above the threshold goes 4 dB above the threshold, okay? And then you set a 4 to 1 ratio, which means that when the signal goes above the ratio, then instead of it being 4 dB louder, instead it's 1 dB louder. So it's a 4 to 1 ratio, which means for every 4 dB that's getting above the threshold, only 1 dB is coming out. If it goes up to 8 dB above the threshold, only 2 comes out, because that's the ratio, okay? 3 to 1, 4 to 1, really transparent and useful for things that you just want to kind of make glue together in the mix. Bass guitar, vocals, even background vocals. Now, again, when I mentioned in the very beginning that character was a big thing, you can definitely go higher and get more character, okay? When you go to limit, it's 10 dB, which means that, let's use easy math here. If it goes 10 dB above the threshold, then there's only 1 dB coming out, because there's a 10 to 1 ratio, okay? So let me try some math here. If it goes 5 dB above the threshold, it only goes half a dB above the threshold. Okay, make sense? Okay, so that's what ratio is. Now, the LA2A is fixed at compression is 3 or 4 to 1, not sure, or 10 to 1, okay? You also can't adjust the release time. Now, what is the release time? Let's talk about attack and release, okay? Attack is how fast the compressor starts to work after it crosses the threshold, okay? So this is how alert the guy is, right? That's turning the knob down, that's making it, he's got his glasses and he's turning the knob down. When he gets above the threshold, he's turning the volume down, basically, right? This is how fast he is. If you've got the really fast attack time, then it chops off some transients. If you've got a really slow attack time, then a lot of transients get through, okay? This, however, has a preset attack time. Don't even try to change it. It's just the way it is. The release time, however, is also fixed. But it is variable depending on how hard the compressor is working. So if you've got your meter all the way up here at -10, the release time is going to be slower. If it's 1 or 2, it's going to jump back up really fast, okay? So it's variable. Okay, so that's the LA2. It's very cool. Speaking of other very simple compressors, I'm going to grab this Uad D160, one of my favorite compressors here. This compressor is a very simple compressor also. Okay, aside from these bottom buttons here, which is power, input, this is for the metering so that you can tell the meter is looking at the input of the unit, and this is the looking at the output of the unit. This gain change is basically we're looking at GR, or gain reduction. You might have seen that on the LA2. Now this is the threshold. Let's move this over to the snare because I love it on drums. Okay, so here it is on drums. I'm going to push the threshold way up to where we're not getting anything, and then I'm going to press play again, and I'm going to pull the threshold down. It's opposite from the LA2, right? You push it up to get the threshold on this one. This one you pull it down, and you can see. Let me solo the snare here. Now I do this on my SSL Instant Awesome. By the way, here's a link just in case you want to check that out. I've got an SSL video and shows you how I set up my SSL channel it makes everything sound better. Okay, this is related to the SSL because it is a VCA compressor. VCA compressors typically have attitude. They have a snarl about them that I like. So let's go over what this compressor does. This is the threshold. This is the ratio, and it's very clearly marked here, and it's variable 1 to 1. If you don't want it to do anything, there's 1.5 to 1, which you'd be surprised how much that will do. But you can go all the way up to 4, and anything 10 and above is considered a limiter. I don't like this one as a limiter so much, but have at it. Have fun with it. And this is the output gain. This is that makeup gain we talked about, okay? So there's no attack, no release time settings on this one. It's just threshold. There's no input and output. It's just threshold, compression, and makeup gain, okay? Okay, let's look at another compressor. Speaking of compressors with output gain. This one, the thing that's hidden in the back, is the threshold. And what you have to do to get the threshold and to get the music above the threshold is you have to literally push the input up, because the threshold is set and you just have to push the gain up until, oh, there's the threshold. Let's start compressing. And that's what you have to do on this. The only thing I wish that these would do is I wish these were tied together to where when you push this one comes down, because what you don't want to happen on a compressor is just to get sheer volume out of it, because shoot, you wouldn't even have to do anything. You could turn the compressor off and just make sure that it's a little louder on the output. Turn it on, it's like, oh wow, sounds great, it's louder. But that's not the point. The point is to decrease the dynamic range. So when you push this up, you have to pull this down. And don't trick yourself. Don't fall for that trick of louder is better. It is, but don't fall for that trick, okay? Okay, so let's talk about attack. The attack is really, really fast on 1176, okay? Like this attack right here is very, very fast. Hardly any transients will get through. And by transients, I mean that attack of the snare drum, that that bark of a vocal, sometimes on like a rock vocal, you won't get any of that here. And you will kill a snare drum or anything if you have the attack this fast. That's why you see most of these really slow. You see most settings from here to here on the attack, okay? And release is usually pretty fast on these, because keep this in mind, the release on a compressor is really what gives its attitude, okay? It's the thing that almost sounds like it's urgent, right? The attack lets the punchiness come through. The release gives it the attitude, okay? So this will work on just about anything. The only other thing is about this one is the ratio. Okay, 4:1, these are ratios here. 8:1, now we're in limiting mode. 12:1, 20:1, and somebody accidentally, I heard, hit all 4 buttons on an LA2A to see what would happen, and all of these circuits happen, and that's why most of these plugins have an all or crush or nuke or whatever. That's to simulate this, and it does have a lot of attitude. Let me see where this is here. I'm just going to reset. I'm just holding Option and resetting everything the way it should be here. So we're going to listen to the snare again. I'm going to bypass the 160. So let's listen with a 4:1 ratio, and let's listen to what this does, okay? Another thing you should know about 1176 is it has a sweet spot, and -6, -7 is where the sweet spot is for me. So we're gonna go for that. We're gonna push the input up until we're getting about between 5 and 7 dB of gain reduction. Okay, now notice I'm going to turn the attack all the way up and listen to what happens. It's subtle, but you can hear the transients coming through a little bit better when the attack is really, really slow, okay? Release, let's turn it all the way up and listen. Okay, now did you see when I turned the release to its slowest setting? It's still moving. Okay, it just got back into place. So this release, very slow, you don't want it to set that way. Unless you're trying to compress something like strings or possibly a vocal, maybe a mix. I would never use this on a mix personally, but maybe some people have. Comment below and let me know. So anyway, attack, release. Very fast attack and release times on the 1176, okay? There's another version of this one called the Bluey, and this is a blue stripe. There's 3 variations of the 1176. There's a black face, voila. There is a silver face, which is not listed, and a Bluey. The Bluey, the blue stripe, has the most attitude of all to me. Listen. You hear that attitude it's got? So, you know, I sped up the attack, or slowed down the attack just a little bit. No, I sped it up. And then the release is really fast. On drums, when you use compressor, use fast release time. That's where you're going to get that attitude, okay? I push the input up until this happened, until, you know, 5 to 7 dB, and then you get this, without. And that's really nice when you add it in parallel with it, okay? Like when you use a smack track. We'll cover that in a later video. Okay, so 1176, a little bit more complicated, but now you know everything you need to know to get a good sound out of it, okay? So we're getting a little bit more and more complicated as we go. But since we talked about the 160 and the 1176, which are VCA type compressors, let's talk about this guy. This is an SSL solid state logic. It's a bus compressor, but I'm not sure how close it is to the one that's in the channel strip, but we're going to talk about this one, okay? So let's talk about what we see here. We see from the top left, we see a threshold. We know what that is now. We see the makeup gain. We've seen that before. Here's the attack and release, okay? Now, the attack, this is really fast here. This is really slow. This is really fast release. And this is that auto thing that we saw in the LA2A, right? The auto release. If it's digging really hard, it's going to come up really slow. If it's not digging that hard, it's going to come up kind of fast, okay? I see a lot of people leave it in auto. And also you see the ratio. So there's only 3 settings here, 2 to 1, which is, you know, very gentle, but still very, still has attitude. 4 to 1 and 10 to 1. 10 to 1 is the limiting mode, right? Okay, so let's just see what we got here. Let's just do a reset here. And so it's got the threshold all the way up. Attack's at a reasonable place. 2 to 1 ratio. Let's listen to the drum. Now I'm going to abuse this a little bit just so that you can hear the attack, okay? Hardly any transits are getting through. I'm going to turn it up and listen to this. Okay, now the release is a little slow. I'm going to speed the release up a lot, and you'll start to hear a lot of attitude now. So I increased the ratio a little bit. I'm going to pull it back down to 2 and just lower the threshold so we get a lot more compression. Okay, now you're starting to hear that attack of the snare, right? It's too much, but I'm doing it for an example. This is the thing you don't want to kill too much. This particular snare on this particular song, which you can find on Mixcoach Member, has a lot of attack on it for my taste. So I would not use a compressor like this, because then you end up with more attack, and you don't necessarily want that. You might want to pull this attack down and see what happens there. So let's do that. You see, it's doing a really nice job. I just bypassed it, and it's doing a really nice job of, let's pull the makeup gain. It's doing a pretty nice job of taking that attack and making it more reasonable. Without. So you can see you can really shape a drum, a vocal. I'm not going to have time to do a lot of vocals and stuff like that, but I want you to see how you would use a compressor. There's no rule book that says that you have to experiment with the compressor every time. You should find a compressor that you like and stick with it. You know, if it's the sound you like, then do it. You don't have to buy a plug-in every other day. Okay? Okay, we've talked about opto compressors, which is the LA2. We've talked about the VCA compressors, which is a solid state, more attitude, grungy compressor. We're going to circle back to one other compressor here, that last one, Universal Audio, and we're going to go with the Fairchild. And the Fairchild is one of those compressors that, man, did I ever want one of these. I dreamed of the day that I would just like open a barn door or a garage door or go in somebody's house or an old studio and there would be a Fairchild sitting on the floor like with paper piled up on it, and I could just buy it for like nothing. These things back when I started was going for $35,000. So it's huge, it's heavy, it weighs as much as a house and costs as much as a house. So you don't need one of these. The plug-in will do you just fine. Now this one is a little bit more complicated because it has input, output, and threshold, okay? So let's talk about this real quick, and we may mess with the drums just a little bit here. Straight up on the input, threshold is at 3, the output is at -2. Don't know why exactly, but let's take a listen to it. So, oh, and also the time constant is the release time, okay? It's the thing that gives it attitude. 1, just like on the 1176, is faster and has more attitude, okay? So let's listen to this. Okay, so immediately you see that when we slowed the time constant down, it starts to not help the sound that much. Okay, so let's get the attack going here, and we're going to listen more than we're going to look at it. Okay. Okay, and now this is something I always do, because I don't, what I mentioned a few minutes ago is I don't want to deceive myself into thinking that just because it's louder, it sounds better. That is not the case. And as you mature as a mixer, you'll start to realize that more and more, that you don't want to deceive yourself into thinking that just because it's louder, it's better. Let the whole rest of the world think that. And me and you, we're going to be all the wiser, okay? So here's one thing that I do. I'll bypass it. And you see it sounds completely different. And if you like it, you like it. But it's roughly the same volume, right? And we do that by the makeup gain. Completely different snare sound, right? Now we've got it cranked up there pretty good. Let's mess with the time constant, or the release time, just a little bit. Okay, so that's it's more of a complicated compressor, but you know how to use it now, right? I don't know anything about this lateral vertical. It has something to do with mid-side, which it compresses the mono signal separately than it does the left and right signal. I haven't messed with that too much. If you know how to do that, drop a video in the comment section, and we'll check it out. I haven't messed with it too much. I know my mastering engineer does it sometimes, and it's kind of cool. But anyway, yeah, so we covered a lot of compressors today, and this is how you use them to kind of shape your sound. Next week, we're going to be talking about automation and how I use automation, and when you should use it and when you should leave it alone, okay? So, hey, if you like this video, if you found it helpful, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and ring that notification bell, because you don't want to miss one of these videos, right? Okay, so ring the notification bell, and don't forget that I've got some training listed below, and it is mixcoach.com/workshop, and I'll cover more things like this, specifically some things on the attack time and some mental mindsets, so that you can get your vocals in the right place, you get your mix done. Covers a lot of stuff, okay? mixcoach.com/workshop. I will see you next week. Thanks for hanging out with me. Bye.